All right, let's talk about editing and compiling sounds together. This is going to be a lot of DAW time. Let's talk about the power of suggestion. Later on in the course, we're going to be studying Foley art, and in doing that, we'll be dealing with the idea of performing sound effects in movies or games that accentuates their sound in the narrative. Typically, this involves recreating weak sound cues from the dialogue recording, like footsteps that you can't hear, replacing sounds with more impactful or hyper-real sounds, especially objects that are prominently manipulated on screen, like if you see someone move a screeching door, probably want to hear that, and creating sounds for things that don't actually have sound, like fantastical creature sounds or anything in space or sci-fi. Musique concrète is the art of arranging sound objects that are decontextualized from their original source, edited and manipulated, and arranged in order to construct an ordered musical structure that does not rely on traditional relationships of pitch and rhythm, but instead creates a collage or narrative of sonic events. We studied this last year in Music Tech 1. But you can see it's very close to this idea of creating more impactful or hyper-real sounds that you'll see when we study Foley art. In both cases, what you're hearing may not be what's actually there. Techniques like splicing, enveloping, and re-enveloping, time and pitch changes, layering, panning, lots of effects, and automation are all common tools that will be used for sound design. Doing this creates a psychological space for the listener that accentuates the reality of the visual media or the lack of it and lets the brain try and create some sort of mental picture to fill in. And it does that with sound. Or it creates a sense of discontinuity and confusion by separating the sound from any visible source that's further amplified by manipulations. What perspective are you using sound to impart to the listener? Reality? Are you trying to create the sense of being on a beach, hearing the waves, hearing some gulls? Are you trying to create something fantastic? Dragons screeching and flying over Westeros, and that last season that we will never discuss. Or something that doesn't exist in any other conceivable way. So a couple of considerations. Less is more. Don't oversaturate a narrative piece or a Foley performance with every conceivable sound. You don't need it. It will come through as mud in the mix. Accentuate the parts that need to draw the listener's attention. This is performance, in part, when you're mixing. Use a MIDI control board to actually map out automation controls for panning and for volume faders. Play the automation, map those out to the knobs and faders on your controller, and then play it in to create the breakpoints. And commit to the performance, 100%. Are you doing really quick swoops of volume? Are you doing really quick pans? Perform them. Get them to sound as real as you possibly can. Overdub, re-record, but commit to it 100%. Last consideration on suggestion, there's no rubric or perfect recipes for sound design, but there are suggestions to start from that we will discuss in class. So here are some of those basic constructs, and we're going to really leave these open-ended right now. We will come back to these quite a bit when we start doing Foley and video games. But again, these are not recipes, they are just suggestions. We'll start with some general considerations. Amplitude envelopes are your best friend because they let you develop the sound over time in terms of its amplitude. How does it start? How does it ramp up? How does it end? How long is it? You can describe all of these in the volume automation. Compression can be really really good. It can smooth over a lot of dynamic ranges and push things to the back if you don't apply makeup gain. Is something really noisy in the recording? Gate it. That helps to get rid of a lot of noise. For hybrid and layered sounds, keep in mind, these are very common. You're going to want to do these, and you're going to want to put these into a group and fade between individual tracks in the group before bouncing it to a separate audio clip. Once you have that separate clip, you can put that into a sampler and use it, but I really recommend grouping things. And of course, we will be looking at how to do this in class. Do you need variations on a sound? Filters are your friend. Especially with repeated things like sword hits or other weapon impacts, you can use a filter, change the cutoff, change the cue, and just render different version after different version until you have 20 or so different sounding but related sounds. Splitting up recorded audio can be really interesting. Sometimes you can get more interesting sounds after removing the initial attack or the release of a sound and then splicing together something different. Just a nice little crossfade and the beginning of sound A and the end of sound Q, and you've got really cool sounds. Get really comfortable with pitch and time warping in your DAW, and especially get comfortable at automating it when you can. And remember that automation can be used on just about every parameter in a DAW, including effects. This is often the key in designing sounds that are dynamic, that are shaped, that are moving, and that don't just sound like, oh, I hit a button. Most importantly, though, do not forget panning when you are assembling things. It really helps if every sound has its own place in the sound field, and it adds interest if they move around and change position via automation. If you hear footsteps going from left to right, or if you hear a volume decrease while the reverb goes slightly up and it makes it sound like someone is moving away from the listener. That's really interesting. Also, just as a reminder from MUS 3701, if you turn in mono projects, I will be subtracting massive amounts of points. So, a couple of suggestions. Let's start with crowds. Typically, you can record a crowd, but you're going to want to layer multiple recordings on top of each other to really get the murmuring susurrations of a crowd. You can record yourself and friends talking nonsense syllables like listing vegetables is a great idea. Rhubarb, celery, carrot, apple, banana, zucchini, eggplant. Something like that. That gets the contour of the speech needed in the scene. And then you can have them shift it to what you want. So it could be an angry mob screaming things like eggplant, rhubarb, zucchini, carrot. But when you start layering it together with, 10 people doing it per take, maybe reverse one, well, this gets pretty interesting. This is called a walla track. It's used to get these murmuring crowd noises. It can also be recorded at really, really low volume levels. And alternately, you can use multiple recordings using different languages, some reversed and some not, to really kind of mask what's being said. And really, take away from the fact that you are reciting vegetable names or other nonsense syllables and hide that and make it sound just like murmuring crowds. If you're going to do that, I recommend using both forward and backward versions in layers and automate some volume changes between them. Just keep the overall volume relatively low because crowds are generally heard as a background part. They're not the focus. A little bit of reverb will help to sell the illusion of realism as well. Preferably convolution reverb that reflects the space that you're going to place the crowd in. And remember to offset the layers so that they start at different points. So that, say, one starts at 0, one starts at 10 seconds, one starts at 20, before getting that overlapped region and then looping that overlapped region on the file. That will add a ton of depth because things are deliberately offset that way. And compression can help to level out the sounds, but again, keep the overall volume down. You're suggesting an environment. You don't want the listener to be able to focus on individual aspects of the conversation. You know, if you have a couple of friends that you're recording nonsense syllables, and then you hear, and then, oh my God, I can't believe that Mark and Susie are dating, and that jumps out, it detracts from the realism because it's something that is too real. You're suggesting things with murmuring, and then to have an actual intelligible sentence come out of that, it kills the illusion. For sci-fi sounds, synths and samples are your friend, especially metal sounds and inharmonic synth patches, for which frequency modulation synthesis will be great. Metal resonator effects or ring modulation of any type are common effects, as are automated pitch changes or portamento if you want to create laser effects using a synthesizer. Recording feedback or noise and automating its volume can produce very cool sounds. Make sure that this is done carefully, but you can try passing a mic in front of a speaker and using that as a source sound. Also, electromagnetic mics can be very, very cheaply substituted by getting a telephone induction coil pickup, boosting that through a preamp, and then using that to create interesting sounds. I recommend playing with those and using those for sci-fi sounds. Some classic sources of sci-fi sounds. The airburst when an airlock is open is the compressed air can that you use to dust off your computer, aimed away from a mic. Lasers, pitch shift a synth, or if you have access to a metal guy wire, hit that with a hammer. That's how they created the blaster sounds in Star Wars. For robots, mechanical servos from a really noisy CD or DVD tray can be really, really useful when layered and pitch shifted to add motion. And the voices, of course, are classic vocoder or talkback boxes. For the actual motion of an airlock, a noisy car sunroof and adding more compressed air bursts. And then for a spaceship flyby, start with an airplane, a jet, or a car pass by and pitch shift and filter it. Then add phasing and flanging as needed or really up the rumble in the bass. For whooshes and impact sounds, this is a classic effect. You want to take whatever the impact sound is and reverse it, then time stretch it and adjust the pitch as needed to create your whoosh. Once that's done, you're going to crop the right edge so that it ends at the loudest point in the audio file, then add a second copy of the original impact to the end, and just crossfade the two and readjust. Another way to create whooshing sounds is to take a dowel and just whip it in front of a microphone, 90 degrees to the capsule so that you're not accidentally hitting the capsule of the microphone. And of course, don't forget that you can use different sources for the whoosh and the impact samples. It's very common to use two different ones. Also, if you have Doppler effects, which we'll be covering in week 5 in your DAW, these are really, really effective. Binaural panning and ambisonic encoding and decoding of sounds moving can be really, really effective. For creatures, start with a real animal and then layer and crossfade other things on top. So take the attack sound of a crow cawing and then crossfade that into a bear growl. Or warp the time and envelope the results. So you want demonic sounds, record your dog barking, and then time stretch it down a lot. Then just envelope. Add in recording of mouth sounds or hands squeezing and manipulating a wet cloth or just covered in hand lotion to add moisture and drooling effects or gooping sounds. Convolution is really cool. This allows you to take the spectral components of one sound and apply them to the real components of another. So take the spectral components of a dog growling and map that to bird chirps. Or you can use all of the above. Then for voiced creatures, things that have distinct pitch changes or multiple pitches, you can create the effects with your voice. See what kind of creature sounds you can create. Can you do some sort of weird snarling, growling type thing? Or can you do chirping or other things like that? And record those. Record multiple takes, find the best ones, play around with them. For real-world sounds, sometimes it's just best to go with the original source and record that using your own things from around the house, like kitchen appliances. Nothing sounds quite like a mixer, except for a better mixer. For nature sounds, especially environmental ambience, you are going to want to go out and record those if at all possible. Just make sure that you use a windscreen on the mic, or better yet, get a blimp or a dead cat filter, or better yet, if you can get a blimp with a dead cat filter. Water. If you want to record something that sounds very resonant, you can just fill an inch or so in the bathtub and then do water drops there. If you want to do other water sound recording, above water anyway, you can do that in your kitchen. Get a bowl. I don't recommend using the sink because you can get some reflections and reverb with that. Power tools are another great thing to record. Just use appropriate ear and eye protection. Same with animals and people. Another thing that tends to get overlooked, plants and leaf noises. I love some of the sounds you can get by manipulating different leaves, by just crinkling them next to the microphone, or by getting some grass and shaking it in front of the microphone. Just make sure you check for bugs first before bringing it in the house. But some practical advice: if you can't record your own sound, there is always freesound.org, but you do not have control over the quality of the sounds that people post there. Some will be pristine, 96K, 24-bit, wonderful. Others will be clearly done using a really bad cell phone app, and it's recorded at less than 22K. You can also check out the BBC Sound Archive, but you might not find the exact sound that you want, and things like police sirens are definitely of the British and not American variety. They do have some of the best crowd ambient sounds you'll find, though. Zoom recorders or iPhone apps are good, but again, please remember to properly set the mic gain so you're not clipping, and always use a windscreen because noise and air across the mic are your enemy unless you are trying to do explosion effects. Finally, experiment and have fun. These are suggestions. There are more suggestions, but again, there is no real rubric. If the sound is interesting and you can use it, record it.